All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to Double D Design. I am Demon,
Dragon.
and today we are talking about writing. Last time we talked about some nation building stuff and just world building in general, and working now into just writing in general, rather than building the world. I think the world is an important shell, but filling that shell with a story. I don't know, making like it's like the outside, the pasta part of the ravioli, and the story is the cheese inside the ravioli. um,
Yes.
so Dragon, I just want to jump right into it here. I'm actually gonna start. I sent you a bunch of questions beforehand. I kind of want to start with
Oh no, I
the
didn't read them. Was I
no,
supposed to read them?
it's okay. It's fine. Anybody who thinks we're prepared for this, we're not. Everything's on the fly. That's just how we do things. Uh, but yeah, so like, how do you going into as a DM going into a game, a campaign? For let's use a campaign rather than a one shot. Going into a campaign, how do you determine like the theme of the story, that you want to tell? Like just the theme, the overall, not the specifics of it, just starting from really far out and then kind of working our way in.
So I very much like the model of when we talk about the hero's journey. I just think that model works really well on a broad scale, very broad, right? Because I can't ever tell you exactly what the players are going to do, but I can still kind of put them through their paces a little bit. They're going to start in a small place, at whatever tone and whatever actual. And you asked about theme, but whatever theme that's going to wind up being. Um, I mean, are we talking plot? Are we talking what exactly are we talking about?
Like hero's journey. I think that is theme is such a broad term as well, which is kind of a problem.
Yeah.
But thinking of like, do you want to play a standard fantasy themed story where
Mm-hmm.
it's like
Yeah.
all of the disparate races come together to overcome the great evil, or oh hey, all of this band of adventurers is coming together to overthrow a government, or the theme is uh, the rich people are the bad guys, or the theme is, oh, I don't know, hack and slash, like that sort of deal, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I guess mine's. I this is gonna be kind of counterintuitive, but very much is made up as you go. So I put them in the playground saying like, hey, this is the medieval styled kind of background. And I'd kind of talked about my world before, where it was a sort of a colonial uh, post cataclysm on the home continent kind of setting.
Yep.
Uh, and then what that theme is going to wind up looking like for the players. I mean, as at the beginning of the story, you kind of get the call to adventure. Like, hey, let's go do something, and then I'm going to give them several options, and then we're going to kind of organically grow out from there. Uh, they could decide they want to whisk off to a kind of a Eastern Asian styled elven place, or they want to go underground into the underworld.
Sure.
Whatever that looks like. Like I'm very much going to give them that ability and let it come about organically. That's what my players like. They hate feeling railroaded. We tried to run a pre-made, like a pre-made module,
Yeah.
and we made it about 3 sessions in, and they were like, "Yep, not feeling it. I want to go back to your world." Uh, and I'm not saying my world's any better. It's just that style of freedom. They really want pure freedom.
Yeah. No, that makes
But
sense. So as far as like our campaign right now, I think I have maybe two or three overarching themes. I think the first one is that not all monsters are monsters, and it depends on your point of view. Um, in the sense of like, hey, vampires are traditionally these evil, blood-sucking monsters that are going to uh, eat all life, and also, hey, werewolves are they go crazy at the full moon and they massacre countless people for whatever reason, or goblins. Like you're playing a goblin character, and in a lot of fantasy settings or D&D or whatever, goblins are like ridiculed and evil and these dumb, well, maybe not stupid, but they live underground and they're dirty and they suck. Well, I like as a theme turning all of those ideas maybe not necessarily on their head, but like making the players question their own almost prejudices. If that makes sense.
Well, it does, and it also what I also appreciated is it makes it fresh, right?
Yeah,
I'm not when we're playing in your world, we're not walking through, you know, Tolkien's Middle Earth. That's not what this feels like, which is good. It's nice. It's welcoming. It's fresh. I don't necessarily do it as pronounced. I do try to challenge my players a little bit with what their expectations are,
yeah,
but I find often that comes about in the forms of comedy. They love laughing. They love
yeah.
that little twinge of non-seriousness.
Uh huh.
Random encounters. You run into a goblin that just runs across the road and he's on fire. Why? I don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah.
Like silly things that now like, you're over here talking about like equal representation and treating people like people, and I'm like, yeah, set them on fire. Okay,
it, it,
poor
it,
goblin, but
it
you get the point.
Yeah, it depends on the play group. I mean, we've mentioned this a number of times that you've brought up the comedy part, and you are running with a different number of people and different people in general, versus me, where I'm running with a bunch of very well full grown, maybe not necessarily mature, but
Yeah, yeah,
but adults anyway, and I can kind of use some of those more adult themes where some play groups are not necessarily suited for that. Um, the other theme, like you said, like the people and inequality, equal representation, like that's another one. Is there's political intrigue built into this campaign already, where like the little guy is being stomped on, and there's an opportunity of the workers unite and overthrow the bourgeoisie, and sort of that sort of economic theme as well can be kind of thrown in there.
yeah, definitely. Um, mm,
And growing organically with your players, like you noted, like do you have going into this current campaign with this current play group? I think you've already kind of said it here, but like you didn't have a specific story in mind? Like, did you already have a specific bad guy or overarching arc that like you said, they don't like being railroaded,
no.
and I know you said no, but I still gotta.
Well, so here's the deal. I started them just in they're captive for
Yes.
whatever reason. Their backstory says that they left home to find adventure, is about as bland as it can be. But that's fine. They're captive. They got in trouble in a small village for
Yep.
whatever reason. They haven't been here very long, and the punishment in this small village for getting in trouble, especially for outsiders, is to be thrown down the local well that's run dry.
Yep.
And they get to the bottom and they find a torture room, and they've got little clues to like three different quest lines they can follow, and they come out and they follow none of them, and they go down some random other path. So no, I didn't really have a plan for them. Now I came up with just random ideas,
Yep.
like things that I've always kind of wanted to get into, like local orcs, and this is very much gets into that challenging the standard uh, medieval medieval fantasy thought line. I
Yep.
know orcs weren't in the medieval, but you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
Um, they run into mechanically augmented orcs
Yep.
that are aggressive at first, but it turns out, I mean, really, they're just displaced, and they're dealing with colonizers who've arrived to the land and really challenged their ability to live. Uh, and they've been getting this particular tribe's been getting mechanically augmented by a gnome who's somehow got a hold of a giant I don't know,
Warforged.
kind of a warforged type race, like from another plane. And he's salvaging parts off of this sleeping warforged. I mean, just weird stuff, right? It all came about organically as they played.
Yeah.
I didn't plan that on day one. On day one, I just gave him, hey, down a well. You're down a well, and there's a torture room, and there's a piece of a cloak. And they saw a guy with a cloak on that had a piece missing that was the same color, and they started to pursue it,
Yeah.
and then they didn't. And then I was like, well, the whole like acolytes and the weird evil god worshipping torture room, that was gone.
Yeah.
Any writing I did on that was over. They were not interested, which is fine, totally fine. I'm not upset.
So yeah, no,
But
I totally
you know,
understand that, and with that uh organic nature of the game, as a DM, you have to be prepared for your players to not go with the hooks that you set forth. You dangle a bunch of line and hooks in front of them, and they might just not grab that bait at all and move on to something like you totally
ugh.
different, like you said. Um,
or they
Go ahead.
grab the bait you don't want them to.
Oh yeah,
I gave them a. They were in a potion shop and they were asking if there's anything they could do to make some money so they could afford some stuff. Talking to this small gnome that runs the potion shop, and he says, "Yeah, go down and get me some ring clams from the nearest shore. They're actually 30 miles north of town along the shoreline on a rocky shore. These ring clams. He needs them for whatever reason." I was like, "Oh God, please don't do it! Please don't do it!" And the way I had written this to play out is these ring clams are like they're like a giant donut
yep,
of like clamshell, and they're about 300 pounds each.
yeah,
And they don't know that, and they're like, "Yeah, let's go get ring clams." They get all the way to the beach, and then they find them, and there's these rings all over the beach, these giant round clams, and they're 300 pounds each, and uh, struggling to get a couple back to town was a nightmare. I did not want them to go down that, but they remembered it
yeah,
once they did it because they chose it,
yep.
and they were surprised. And that's that comedy piece in there as well. A little bit of, oh, we're gonna go pick some clams up and make 100 gold. This is great. And they get there and they're like, oh my gosh.
Holy crap! What do we do with these giant clams?
So
So
yeah.
so, with this campaign that I'm running for you guys, I had a very 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 generic, very general idea of who the bad guy is and possible two or three other bad guys, depending on what route you guys end up going. And that's still not necessarily fully fleshed out. And with this campaign, I expect this campaign to go for a long time, like multi-year probable campaign here. Um, Definitely, the other campaigns that I've run, some of them I've had a more concrete plan going in ahead of time. Like I had a campaign that I ran back in college, where there was um, a oh gosh, what the hell are they called? Oh no, a grave knight. There you go, a grave knight. This 9-year old girl had been essentially murdered, and she came back, but she was a grave knight because she was granted powers um, by a god, and she was a level 18 summoner and a grave knight. But like before that campaign even started, I was like, this is the end goal: is that this person is causing. She's now like 9 or 10. 900 or 1,000 years old. She's causing a plague on this continent, and the players are going to have to figure out what the plague, where is it coming from, find her in her necropolis, and then like take her out. And then because she's a grave knight, they have to destroy her armor. But that's it's another thing. But like I knew before I even sat down originally with those players, that's what was going to happen. And then the first campaign in I'm sorry, the second campaign I had in Enlevia, I knew Banahog, the first dragon, the original dragon, was a Dracolich, and he was trying to become a god, and that is what the players were going to go against. Was they were going to stop this evil dragon, this undead dragon, from becoming a god. That was the thing. Uh, Even this last campaign was it's okay. The four horsemen are going to come down and annihilate the world's population. Okay, but how am I going to have them stop them? You know what? I'm going to change it up a little bit. This is kind of you guys are in like an Eastern Asian inspired area. And I was like, oh, you know what? Kaiju. They're gonna have to get all the kaiju together, and then they're gonna have to get the kaiju to blow up the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Like that, I had that in mind, like from the very very get go.
Yeah, I don't do it. That's not how I write. It's not how I plan.
Yeah, and not everybody has to be that way, for
If
sure.
if In fact, I have come up with a BBEG, my big bad evil guy, I came up with him on session 10 of my current campaign.
Yeah.
That's where I kind of wrote that story. Once my players had fallen into some weird stuff and ring clams and giant robots, and then I was like, okay, this is something they really liked. They really liked that giant robot, and it escaped.
Yeah.
What's the background of that robot? Now I'm going to get into why. How did that happen? Why did that guy get there? Oh, it's because this wizard Oxyus is trying to be a lich and plane, you know, planner travel, planner travel, and all kinds of weird. Whatever. We'll get there.
Yeah.
Um, and they're kinda, and it gave me a motivation. It gave me a way to give them carrots to follow.
Yep.
Uh, and it's working. It's working. They could always stray from the path and give up on it and go somewhere else. To which I'll. They also like to have a living world,
Yep.
right? So they've already started down this chain. If they don't finish it, there will be consequences in the world,
Yeah.
which they'll find later. And they love that stuff when they go, "Oh, if we'd only done that 5 sessions ago,"
Yeah.
which is pretty neat. So my writing is very broad and it's very based on each session
Yeah.
and kind of where we're at. Man, honestly I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just making it up. That I don't write that in depth. Um, I
And
I don't know. I just don't.
as DMs who homebrew primarily, I think that's an important note to take away is that we always wing it. We're always making it up. It's just a matter of how much are we making up before the campaign starts and how much are we making up from session to session. For me, I make up I make up shit every single time I sit down at this computer to write the next episode, right? The next session, because I don't know, like, whatever happens is entirely dependent on what you guys do or don't do. I think it's super important to be able to display that living world to your players, um, in the fact that there are consequences, and sitting down and writing those consequences out real time, quote unquote, is a very important skill as a DM if you have that living world kind of mentality, and that's what your players want. Definitely a thing that's going on in our current campaign is that there are certain people, certain players who have lied a number of times to
What?
vampire noblemen, um, and then confessed that to those
Oh
to that
gosh.
nobleman, and she was like, "Are what? You lied to me about this job, and you lied to me about who you were, and okay, like," and she was pissed, and she let that character go, but there are going to be consequences to those actions. Um, you can't just go around lying to authority figures and then just apologizing for it and expecting to get away with it when you're in an authoritarian regime ruled by, uh, these monsters of the night, so to speak. And I only write those consequences after these actions take place. I think about it. I absolutely think about it beforehand, but like, oh, that's a part of being a DM is working on the fly to your players' actions and then being able to put that down in writing later on.
Yeah. Yep.
And here's an interesting one. I actually haven't asked you about this before, but for your players, right? How much, if any, have they written like backstory stuff or even talked about it?
Quite a bit. And what's funny is I feel like I am failing as a DM, and I'm not, but I feel like I am. Because I can tell that they want more, and I think is it they want their backstories to impact the game, and I get it. That is every player, every table ever. I have a player character. If they have a 30-page backstory, they want to be rewarded for writing that 30-page backstory. Um, that's not necessarily the situation I'm in, but
Sure.
good grief, my players absolutely do have pretty in-depth backstories, and they want that reflected.
Yeah. It,
And it's hard.
of course.
So
It's something to take into account, and as a DM, before I start every campaign, I reach out to my players and I give them something like 2 weeks to a month or more to be like, hey, you need to get me a backstory, and we can edit that as we go through. That's totally fine, and we can update things, and it can be as minimalistic or as lengthy as you want. I'm not going to pressure somebody into writing a 30-page backstory. The writing should
I
be on the
don't I
DM.
don't I kind of like the light backstories as a DM,
It,
but you know,
it's a lot easier to integrate um, these shorter backstories with the story itself as a whole, because there's so not necessarily so little information, but the detail is a lot easier to put in. And it's a lot easier to remember and work with. I'm okay with either or, but sometimes I'm a human being, and I'm like, dude, you're writing a 30-page backstory. You're getting all up in my world's chili, like, and hold on a second, I can't include all of this. Like, how do you expect me to include all of this? Especially if you're starting off at level 1. You don't need. Now, if you started off at level 10, maybe a 30-page backstory would make a little bit more sense. But if you're starting off at level 1, you don't need anything more than 2 or 3 pages for the DM to actively work with you and also to explain the fact that you're only level 1. But I think that's just something that I worry about, not necessarily worry about, almost get annoyed with sometimes, but something I can learn to work with and not get annoyed at over time.
yeah, so the backstory piece and the writing, I almost feel like I am not writing it into my stories or into my planning documents
Yep.
for each session. I'm not using that as source material, and maybe I should. You know, just this conversation may help me do that. Uh, Honestly, what I wind up doing is throwing it in at random intervals. One of my players is she really wants to be kind of deceptive and wear disguises, and she wants to pretend to be a doctor, but really she's a witch. You know, that kind of thing. And I was able to work it into a session where she disguised herself using bits of trash nearby, and suddenly she looks like a drake handler and
Yeah,
snuck into a stable area with the racing drakes, and she loved it.
for
Loved
sure.
that being worked in because I knew it was there, but I didn't plan that. That was just they were in a pause, a lull in the grind of the game. They were kind of waiting, looking around what to do, and I was like, well, you do. It comes to mind your disguise skills, and she's like, oh yeah, that's right, I do that, and then it turns into a pretty cool deal.
I think it's really important to remind your players about certain elements of their characters or backstories as you go through, because not everybody's perfect. Not everybody has memorized their character sheet or their backstory perfectly. Um, I know in our campaign that I have brought up the backstories of at least three characters. Actually, all of you, all of your backstories have come up. All four of you. Yours, I think, is the least, has come up the least. But Sierra has had her backstory come up in just simple conversation. Tor's has come up. So Tor is in Pathfinder. There's a heritage called Duskwalker, and um, they are connected to Purgatory or the Boneyard. So he's talked with a psychopomp, which is part of his backstory. And your character, Danny came from the Duper Hell, which is like the old dwarven multi-thousand-year-old halls that have been overrun by monsters and whatnot. And Undercommon is commonly spoke there. And you've spoken with a character and using Undercommon, and you're like, you know what? I know that language. Sure, I'm gonna say this and throw a freaking curveball at the DM and see what he does.
That Yeah, man, I don't know how I pulled that off. That was amazing.
And I think that's kind of a good segue is to being versatile, being a versatile writer. Um, so like we've discussed that you like being organic with your players and allowing them to kind of steer the boat, as it were. Um, do you think that how do you? This is an interesting way. I'm trying to find
So
the words for it. Don't speak. Tell me.
so I think what I would going down. I don't know exactly what you're going to ask, but going down this line of reasoning, how do I actually format? How do I write? What do I write before a session? Because I know what I write is very different from what you write.
There you go. There's
Like
the
what you
words.
physically write before you do a session. What kind of notes do you take? What kind of writing do you do for that session to execute? How much of it is exposition that you're going to read to the player, and how much of it is notes for you as the DM, and how much of it is just you just getting into a groove and writing a story? You know,
Oh.
um, I'll
Well,
tell you, mine's
yeah. Go
mine's
ahead.
not mine's not very long. I keep the primary the primary data that I need, if it's handwritten, I want it on one page.
Uh-huh.
Period. If it's handwritten, I'm doing one page. I'm gonna have there's and you guys can Google this. You can find all kinds of different techniques as far as like what exactly do you need? NPCs, locations, encounters, and loot tables or whatever. Fine.
Yep.
But the way I do it is really different for each session. But it's going to include an outline. The very top of I do it on Word, so I usually have 2 pages.
Yep.
My very top area is just an outline of what I think is going to happen. I know that the PCs are going to encounter trouble on the road. That's the first step. That's I'm looking at one now from my last session.
Sure.
PCs
Yeah,
encounter
yeah, yeah.
trouble on road. What does that mean? I don't know. I'm gonna figure it out. I got tables I can roll. I can just make it up. They can look at a tree and I'll say, "Oh, the tree moves. Oh God, now we have some sort of living tree issue."
Yep.
Um, so that's step one under outline. The next step was to one player there's an NPC that they're kind of traveling with is going to store a carriage and draft horse at a place near the Drake race
Yep.
the Drake race arena, and then they're going to go to the races, and then after that they're going to go to their favorite to the NPC's favorite bar, uh, and maybe visit the Riverwalk district. Right, that's the very first part of my outline. It's 4 steps.
Yep.
They get in trouble, they're going to go to the races, and they're going to go downtown. To be honest, we did about a 2-hour session.
Okay.
They didn't make it to the bar. They didn't make it to step 4.
Yep.
They ran into trouble on the road. They stored the carriage and they went to the races. And now they're heading to the bar on their next session.
Yep.
So that outline is just what I expect is going to happen today. And they may take a total left turn on that, but it's okay. Um, After that, I line out those events. Trouble on the road. I actually didn't give any details. I figured I'd just make it up because I'm
Okay.
lazy.
Yep.
Uh, Storing the carriage, yeah, I wrote a little bit about that, where it was, where is she going to store this carriage, what stables are keeping her horses, all that kind of stuff. And then the races were the big part of this one. Um,
Yeah.
so that's
Absolutely.
mostly what the notes are. Everything after that, when I got into writing for me, I was trying to write the historical background in the districts of this town because I hadn't built the city. And we talked a little bit about city building and nation building in previous episodes, but
Yeah.
I wrote that into my notes. So my session notes were one page of the outline, kind of what's happening, how does this work on this, very very broad.
Yep.
And my second page was really just notes for writing background stuff for me.
Yeah.
I may never read it again unless they decide to go to I don't know. There's a place in my town called the Dog Bridge. I'll tell you right now, I haven't reread it yet. I don't remember what it is. It's a bridge.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's a bridge where street peddlers with no royal approval can sell their wares. Got it. All right. Now I can dig into that if they say, "Oh, we're gonna go check out the dog bridge,"
Oh,
you know.
absolutely. It's important to have those reminders. I think it's unreasonable to expect as a DM or
So
as a player to like have everything completely memorized all the time. Like that's absurd.
so that I'm gonna keep I'll keep talking your ear off. I have one
No,
more
do it.
thing.
Yeah, tell me.
This is very different from another session I had, session 1.8. So this is the eighth session
Yep.
for this campaign. I knew it was going to be very action based,
Yep.
and there were going to be some NPCs that I needed to have some background on.
Uh huh.
And it was going to be very interactive and very intense, right? This is when my players encountered the giant robot and the the gnome that was salvaging parts off the robot. The orcs had left. Whatever it was, there was going to be a fight.
Yep.
So I broke it down into kind of what is the sequence of events here? What do we expect is going to happen? The journey. So what the trip to the place,
Yep.
the arrival. What happens when they get there?
Yep.
The next big thing was the awakening. When that giant robot wakes up, it's going to wake up. The gnome's gonna power it, or the players are gonna power it. I'm gonna make sure it wakes up because that's a big part of my story.
Yeah, for sure.
And then there will be the offer, right? I figured in this one there's gonna be some bartering. Either they're gonna wind up in a fight or they're gonna find their way out of it. Either way, it needs to be addressed. And then I have characters with their stat blocks. So they ran into Herlin the gnome. I've got his spells figured out. I've got all his stuff,
Yep.
and some possible actions written under that about what he may or may not do. And then if they fight, here's what happens. If they don't, here's what happens. And then how do we wrap this up? So that was the whole thing. After below that, I've also got a list of characters that they're going to encounter during this. So
Yeah. Okay.
the trip, the arrival, waking the robot up, the offer, and then the fight, and then wrapping up. So I broke it into stages. So I don't write the same for every session.
Of course. And I think uh, go with as DMs, go with all of whatever you use, uh, just whatever works for you. Don't try to force it into the way Dragon does it, or I'm about to describe the way I do mine. Don't try to force it one way or the other. You can take from both of us, or however you organize your own notes. For me, I honestly don't think we're that different in the kind of the general scale. Because I like to do things chronologically. What I expect is going to happen time wise. So, for example, I will go to I'll go to the second session of the this campaign for you guys. Um, I started out pretty much. I said, okay, this is the day. So it's the date and time. So it's the morning of the 6th of Afton Road, and it's a Fours Day. This is the month and the day, and then the day of the week. Sure, got it. Um, and this was I entitled this one the Day of Worship because that was the big thing on this episode was everybody was gonna go worship the Blood Queen, and that was like the focus. Um, so I was like, okay, the first thing that you're gonna do is okay, worship. Cool, that's the first part. Um, and then okay, what happens at that worship session, right? Of like who's important here. Um, there's Theodore and Tessa are the bartender and barmaid that were that had kind of escorted you guys down there. And then I'll break it down into like in a kind of bullet form. So the farthest left bullet will be worship. It's underlined, whatever. I'll tab over and down one. I'm like, okay, here's some DM specific notes of this is what they'll see, this is what they'll hear, um, this is how the conversations should roughly go, what information these NPCs are willing to give, um, and then I'll also anything I'll put in quotes like anything exposition wise that I want to read. I have a problem, as I'm sure you guys have heard, that I either ramble or I forget words, and I just sit there just saying the same thing for 10 seconds as my brain short circuits. So I personally really need to write out a lot of the exposition to make it sound good to my own ears. Whether it sounds good to the players is it's important too, but like for myself, that's something to keep myself going. Um,
So
Go ahead.
quick interjection. My method with that, instead of writing exposition, I may write very short amounts, like very, very small, just to get the ball rolling. But after that, my trick is to use your senses: sight, smell, taste, hearing, and what does it feel like. Those help me with exposition a lot. I think senses. When I start to draw a blank and go, oh god, I'm going to repeat myself. Oh, what's it smell like here? What's it feel like? What's it look like? What's happening to them? That helps me.
For sure, and that's a useful tool as DMs. I think we noted that for like town building earlier is like, hey, what does this feel like here? What is this? So for me, that's how I write my exposition. Generally speaking, is I like having a very precise picture portrayed to my players' minds. I have an idea of what this thing looks like, and I want you guys to know exactly what I think this should be, so that you guys are on the same exact playing field as I am. Um, so yeah, that definitely that sight, that sound, that smell, um, those feelings and whatnot. But then just I like to add that extra detail, and I have a tendency to lose that detail, or at worst, overshare. As a DM, I have a problem sometimes of talking too much and oversharing details that I shouldn't be sharing right now. So for me, writing those notes as like this is exposition, I have to say this. Okay, these other notes are not exposition. I'm gonna save those as conversation pieces, or I'm gonna write in bold text next to it. Do not tell players, which I've done before. Um, but yeah, so I'll go through exposition, and then like if there's either spells or magic or combat or anything like that, I'll throw in any difficulty checks in their levels. Like, oh, it'll be a DC of a 20 to with perception to see what this guardsman's talisman looks like, or a will save to overcome this religious magic or whatever. Okay, this is what happens if they fail. This is what happens if they pass. Um, and then I'll go again. Okay, that's everything at the worship part. Okay, now it's the people's feast, and it this is what happens, and I kind of go chronologically that way. Um, but for me, I have a Google Doc, and this Google Doc is I told Dragon before we started recording 76 pages long for this campaign, and we're only on the eighth session, and a lot of that is not necessarily writing for sessions. The good top oh gosh, let me see, the top 20 pages of this document are anything from important NPCs to country information, town information, shop information to I've literally entitled this "Fun Tidbits." Fun tidbits in case I want to throw them in there or whatnot. But that's how I keep my NPCs and other important information sorted. Is that it's not necessarily part of the session to session format, but it's important enough to keep track of in the same document. Because I have dozens of documents for this world that are not necessarily super important to this campaign or to that session. So I try to break it out that way. And now I'm going down to like comparing it to a more action-oriented session. The last session that you guys played was a ruin. It was a ruin under a hill, and I noted the time of day, and I noted okay, right at the top, these are the enemies that they're going to face and where I can find them in the book. So, for example, there was a Hellhound that you
Yes.
guys fought, and I was like, oh, Hellhounds are in Bestiary 1 on page 205. Cool. Rust Monster, also Bestiary 1, page 283. And there was a couple of ones that you missed, like there was a gelatinous cube in there that you guys didn't end up fighting because you did a puzzle correctly. Um, I said, okay, these are the enemies. And I was like, okay, these are the traps. These are the traps that are going to occur in this dungeon. And then from there, I went room 1, room 2, room 3, room 4, room 5, room 6. And again, broke it down into exposition to describe the scene. Um, any notes for myself, like if anybody had bothered to cast Detect Magic, yes, they would find there was magic in this area. Um, and then for puzzles, I was like, okay, uh, there's a red orb, there's a brown orb, there's a blue orb, and a light blue orb, and they represent these things. And okay, they go to these pedestals, but where are they actually? So I can set up the scene properly because I use a lot of Dwarven Forge, and I wanted to make sure I had the setup proper so that I could not only describe it to the players but also set it up properly and show them where the movements are. Some people don't necessarily learn or are able to do puzzles just by listening, and they have to have that visual input. Um, and so I think writing out that detail beforehand, any DCs, any monsters where they are, any puzzles and their positions and whatnot, I think those are really important to being able to tell the tale, spin the yarn of that dungeon or of that ruin or of that tomb or whatever you're doing as a DM, so that your players, not only you, but make sure your players don't get lost. I,
Definitely.
I think that's the kind of the end of that statement. There's a lot of writing that I have, but and there's a difference obviously between what you and I do.
Yeah,
But I think it's still the general premise of like giving yourself those hints in those notes and the describing of those scenes and then the timeline.
definitely. And you put more detail into it. We're doing the same thing in a lot of ways. I'm just trying to use keywords to fire off my brain, right? Like a smaller description or maybe not as much exposition. I'm just not as I'm not putting as much effort into it, I think.
Well, see, I think you're putting the effort in on the back end in the actual session itself because you've built yourself wiggle room, but also at the same time you have these six keywords or whatever, and now you have to spit it out of your brain through your mouth to the players.
Oh, did you write in school? Like back in like elementary, high school, college, whatever?
Yeah,
Well, I'm sure
so
college, but I mean but I mean of course you wrote in college, but I mean writing was that something you did?
so that's that. So yes, not necessarily so much in elementary school. I had always thought of doing that. I didn't really, I take that back. I guess I did. Um, nothing of particular import. It's elementary school, but middle school I had started some kind of mediocre writing, and then in high school I took two creative writing classes. Now it was the same creative writing class. I took it twice, not because I failed, but because I wanted to, and I had an extra elective. Let's be clear here.
Uh
um,
huh.
but yes, so I wrote anything from poetry because I was a lovesick teenager to I had a oh god I don't know like a 200 page uh quote unquote novel. It was not very good. I found it maybe 2 years ago and I was like oh god, this is awful. But you got to start somewhere.
For sure.
Not everybody's a J.R.R. Tolkien right off the bat.
Yeah. So I mean, there's some basic skills that we're talking about here that I think for some listeners it comes back to you know familiarity with it and comfort with it. And I don't think that you have to have been a person who wrote in middle or high school or did that, because I did competitive creative writing in elementary, and then on into middle and high school. It was an interscholastic thing, the schools competing, and it was this whole thing, and I enjoyed it. But you don't have to have a background in that in order to do this. I mean, especially like, what if English is your second language too, and you're trying to communicate with a group of folks that are maybe it's not. And man, all I could say is keep it basic, keep it simple,
Yeah.
do what works for you to get you going into a session. You will make it up as you go if you have to,
Yep.
but if you want to put the detail and the time into it, and you want to get after it, and you want to flex those writing muscles, I mean, I do enjoy it when I do sit down and get after it. I mean, more power to you. It only benefits your players, really.
Right. I think the important takeaway, or one of the important takeaways, is that your writing is mostly for you, right? Of course you're trying to tell a
Yeah.
story, but like if your notes aren't helping you to tell that story, then you don't have to write those notes. But if they are and you want more, then yes, of course, flex those writing muscles, write more. If it's helping you to tell that story, that's great. And a sidebar on language. Language is important because not everybody in your playgroup might not be a primary speaker of your language, and it's important to be inclusive to those people and to be able to write to that. Or I remember reading a story one time where there was two people in the this primarily English speaking group, and they were both bilingual and they both spoke English and Spanish. And English was not one of the players, one of those two of those primary language. And every once in a while, they would pipe up and ask something like, "Hey, what does this word mean?" And they would have to switch to Spanish, and they would talk, and they'd figure it out. And you can either just, that's great, you guys can do that, or you can incorporate that into the game and be like, "Oh, well, actually, Spanish is the new, I don't know, Elven or something, or or Draconic. It's a separate language that these two characters know and that they can communicate in, and it adds that extra layer of fun, I think, for the other players. Like, whoa, what are they saying? I can't speak that language. Whoa, they can really keep a conversation secret. But I know it's kind of on a tangent, but I just thought of it there as you mentioned
Yeah,
language.
maybe. I mean, it depends. I mean, it depends on the situation, of course. But yeah, that
Yeah,
that's an interesting idea to explore.
and if you can write that in, then sure. But if you are
Yeah.
unable to, then sure. And writing notes is definitely for me a session thing for the most part. And but before I start a campaign, I generally will write a very 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 generic outline of like, okay, the first arc is going to be the players in Vampire Land. Then the second arc is, well, if they hang out in Vampire Land, this is what's going to happen. And then the third arc is, well, okay, I've built to these two things. Here's the finale, or hey, I have two more arcs to go, whatever. But you don't even have to go into that much detail if you don't have an overarching B-bag to fight against at the end, or you don't have an overarching story theme that you want to tell, and you're just being organic, then you don't have to do that beforehand. But that's just something that I do.
Yeah. What what's your end game writing style like when you're note taking? What do you do during the game?
Ah, okay, cool. Um, So during the game, I do very minimal note taking. I have a terrible attention span. Um, it is draining to be a DM, and it's a good thing. It's a good draining. I enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, but like my attention span is not great. So really have to focus and pay attention to be able to absorb all of it into my brain, because otherwise I miss things. The only time I really take notes is during combat, because that is like it has to be in order, and there are very specific hit points I have to take track of, and I'll usually track that like off screen on my own or on the play mat where all the minis are. Uh, but I'll type that up. But otherwise, if there's something that happens during the session, as long as I'm paying attention, then I will remember that and type it up. And worst case scenario, I can ask the players like, "Hey, who was the one who knocked on the door in the first session? Oh, right, it was Danny. Right, okay." And I'll,
Of
you know,
course it was.
of course it was right, but it's important for me personally to write down. So I'll do I do mine in episodes. I'll say, okay, episode 7, uh, title. Okay, and then I'll be like, the next big header will be what happened to episode 7. And I'll run through it. I'll be like, okay, actually, I'll read some of the notes right now. Okay, room 1. They quickly found the pillars and inspected them. Tor realized that the elements were involved in the puzzle. And then Sierra realized that they needed to add the elements to it. And that was it. That's all I got for that one. And I say, oh, room 2. Uh, there were different reliefs in the wall, and all of them tried to fit their blades into the blade-sized reliefs. And Tor killed the rust monster. And then Tor was trying to take his armor off, but Leon and Danny began searching through debris. Leon found some coins. Danny found an armor piece. Sierra found a shield piece, and Azalea found a crystal. And it goes like that of like just these really short, succinct, like this is the important part. This is what I need to remember for the next session. How do I meld what I had written for this session, what my idea is for the next session, and then what actually happened, all into one kind of amalgamation for the next session?
Yeah, I think my style is very very similar. It's basically the same way. When I'm playing, I'm too busy to really do any kind of detailed notes. The other thing I focus on is names, right?
Oh,
So when we're
absolutely.
playing, I'll be like, "Oh God, they met a new NPC and they asked for her name." Generate out of my brain, Susan Schmansmer. Write it down, right?
Yep.
And I also find that those, and then I'll say like I may do something small like fight or whatever, and then of course you got the combat notes, which are initiative and things like that. Got it. But those story notes, and then what I do immediately when we finish the sessions, my players are like, "Oh man, that was great, thanks." And they get up and they leave the table and they go to do something else. I don't leave. I stay there for about 10 minutes, and on my handwritten notes, and I got a little notebook that augments my Microsoft Word stuff. My notebook, I will write out, okay, on this day, we played on October 30th. This happened. I will go through because it's fresh in my mind what just happened. Here's what each part of the session was. That way, when they come back and we do the session recap at the beginning, like, hey, last time these things happened, I've got it right there in my notebook. But I have to stay back for like 10 minutes post session to do it.
Oh, absolutely. My attention span is so bad that once the session's over, and unless I'm sitting there talking to somebody, I will get up and I need to walk away for a minute, and I will go focus on something else for a couple minutes. I'll clean up, but I have to write what happened in that session that same day for me to remember it properly. I mean, worst case scenario, nowadays I'm recording the sessions, but back in the day, if I didn't write it down within the hour, I was screwed because I was like, I don't remember any of this crap. I have really bad memory issues, and yeah, I need to do this. But now I can kind of work it within the day or so because it takes up. We do like 3 to 5 hour sessions, so there's a
Yeah, we
lot
do.
going on, and it's important to stay back and take those notes. It usually takes me like anywhere from 10 to 45 minutes, depending on what we did or how detailed I want to go into it. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
just to DMs and aspiring DMs, take notes, please, to make any sense as you can go along through the campaign. It won't make sense if you don't take notes, unless you have some perfect brain and you can remember everything exactly. then yeah, that's great. But the rest of us plebeians.
Yep.
So as we're kind of reaching the end stages here, with your current with your current play group and your current story, um, how do you want to like how do you mix the elements that you want and the elements that your players create and the elements that they want? Like how do you marry those things together and write them?
Hmm. Well, I mean, one of the biggest things that because I think that's an important question that DMs have to keep in DMs, GMs, whatever, have to keep in perspective or in sight is that what you want matters, right? So, I mean, I love seeing my players have a good time. I love that is part of it. But what? How else? What about the other side of that? What do I want to see? I like to see some reality brought to things a little bit. I like to challenge folks to actually role play something. I like to bring up that, okay, you did this thing, and now this happened. Now what? Right? To give it some validity to where it's not just stereotypical. I'm a paladin with a sword and shield, and I stab the bat. Like I want to see some things happen. That gets me interested in the game. Is thinking what would really happen in this situation? What if you were really there? So
Right.
how do I marry that? Uh, it works out really well
Yeah.
because they enjoy comedy, and I find a lot of times the reactions that real people, and you can see this. There's a wonderful YouTube channel with some great comedy. Viva La Dirt League.
I
I'm
love
sure
those
you've,
guys.
yeah, I know, wonderful. And I think it touches on that, right? Because they'll go into some, uh, you know, RPG type stuff, and it's just ridiculous, like turn-based combat. What are you doing? Like that's I don't go to that. I don't try to discredit the mechanics of the game, but I do discredit some of the silly things that players do. That's part of my enjoyment. Is yeah, all right. You just oh, what was it? One of my players cast gosh, I can't remember what it's called. It's like maddening whispers, right?
Yeah.
Uh, the opponent hears or the enemy hears whispers in their mind and they start to go crazy. She cast that on a city guard in
Oh
broad
yeah,
daylight.
I remember you said yeah.
So what is that? And the player's like, "Oh, I'm gonna drive this guard mad, and we'll get away." And I'm like, "Bro, you're in the middle of a village or a city midday, and this is terrifying." The guy starts clawing at his eyes and his ears and screaming in the middle of the road, like, "Oh God!" And that was hilarious. I know it doesn't sound hilarious, but it was because it wasn't what they expected, really. And that's where I kind of marry that. Uh, and it's in the gameplay. It's what do I want to see? I want to see challenging these fantasy things against the test of reality,
Yeah.
and that helps them with what they want to see. And so how can I write this into my stories? It comes naturally. Like if I'm prepping for it just these come in interactions, not in what I write. It comes from critical thinking in the moment of,
Right.
hey, this thing just happened, what does it look like? Does that answer your question?
No, absolutely. And for me, I'm almost imagining this as a game of catch almost as the player throws a curveball. Say, hey, I'm gonna cast maddening whispers on this guard. How do you react? Okay, DM catches the ball and says, okay, here's the reality. You throw a fastball. Yep, this guy's gonna go nuts. He's in the middle of town, and there's other guards around, and yeah, you are very obviously casting a spell on this dude. Holy crap! Here's the consequences. Now, players, you catch. What's happening? What do you do? And really like that organicness to it. And then sitting down and writing later, like, hey, this these players did this to the guard in broad daylight in front of all these people. What are the consequences of that action? Other than they get arrested or thrown out of town or whatever. Maybe word spreads about them, and maybe I'll write that like, oh, somebody heard about you because you drove that one dude crazy one time. Um, Giving notoriety to the players as they level up, as they oh, you were the people that slayed the dragon. Oh my God, you guys are amazing. Here, have a free meal on me because he was a scourge to the town or something. Um, and then Also, for me, a big deal, like you said, is getting that reaction uh, out of players. For me, it's not only that, but also, uh, yeah, this is a game for me too. It's not the players versus the DM necessarily, and I like not only am I weaving the world, right? That's kind of a big part of why I want to write and do these things, uh, and helping the players play in the sandbox. But like I like throwing NPCs at people. I developed there's two dwarves. Um, they're husbands and they're both wizards and they're married and they showed up like in session like 4 or 3 for the players and Leon and Lorenzo and I came up with them. God, a long time ago and it just happened that like I was like, you know what? I want these two guys in here. I want to see how the players react to them. So not only am I getting that reaction, but it's also like I'm inserting um the catalyst for that versus like your story where the players inserted that catalyst for that. And I think both having both of those elements are very important as DMs to be able to build an enjoyable story and something believable or something that your players can really set their jaws in to really get that world going.
Yep, definitely.
Well, as we kind of wrap up our discussion on writing here, I think we could talk about writing for ages and ages. And I think the last thing that I really want to hit on is the the nitty gritty writing. What is the most annoying thing for you to write? If you feel like you have to write something, what is the worst thing?
Um, the worst thing that I have to write, I think I don't like I really don't like it. This is something I think some people do like, but I don't like rewriting or designing stat blocks.
Oh,
I
thank you.
don't like I don't like I mean I just want to turn to a page in the monster manual or whatever and be like there it is. Or if you're using an app, just boop,
Right.
there it is. Or just get it off the internet, whatever. Uh, but man, sometimes I have to change it. You know, my
Yeah.
players ran into a wizard, and out of the pre-made wizards that are in some of these books, the mages and or whatever, they're either underpowered or overpowered, and they don't fit quite what I need them to do, so I have to change it.
Yeah.
And magic users are the toughest ones, right? Because
Ugh.
their pre-made lists of spells are not always what you need, and so I'm in there rewriting. Or if I got a wizard that's actually kind of super weak, I got to change their strength modifier. They're super strong or whatever. I hate writing that. I hate preparing stat blocks.
So
I just
this
don't like it.
this is an absolutely wonderful segue. I didn't even do this on purpose. I just looked at my notes. Into next episode is NPC building. So
Oh, great.
the thing I hate writing is also stat blocks, but I love NPC building.
Yeah, that's different. That's different.
So
Stat blocks suck. NPC building is great.
I did not do that on purpose, but next time we'll talk about NPC building. So yeah, hey, thank you all for joining us on Double D Design. Dragon and I are we love talking about this shit. I love talking about this shit. You love talking about this shit. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, you know how it is. And we're just sitting here having a conversation too. That's a good thing. I mean, we're still in the we're very early in the process of this particular format.
Yes.
But man, it's good. We're just talking about something we love, so that's cool.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you guys, and we will see you guys next time. See ya.
See ya.